Welcome to our second masterclass of 2025. We're very excited to present this material to you today on creating a culture of dialogue at your school. We have a full and rich presentation scheduled for the next 90 minutes, so we won't delay much with an introduction on my part. I'll just say a few practical words and then we'll get going. We're expecting around 300 people to log in at some point today, so you're all very, very welcome. Please keep your microphone on mute during the presentation. And know that this masterclass is being recorded, so if your camera is on, then we assume you've given your consent to be recorded. Otherwise, you're invited to keep your camera off. With that, I'd like to introduce your teacher for this masterclass, Professor Didier Pollefeyt. Didier is a Belgian Catholic theologian and full professor here at the Catholic University of Leuven. He obtained his doctoral degree in theology with a dissertation in moral theology and was appointed professor at the faculty in 1998. His research and teaching focuses on multiple topics of intersection, from catechetics, methods of RE, Catholic identity at Catholic schools, interreligious dialogue, and peace ethics. He holds the chair of the Center for Academic Teacher Training here at this faculty. He serves as the director of the Center for Peace Ethics of KU Leuven. He's the director of our research group on enhancing Catholic school identity, and is the supervisor of Thomas, the website for religious education practitioners in Flanders, sponsored by the Bishops' Conference. Additionally, he also serves as a member of the Belgian National Commission of the Religious Relations with Jews and is a representative for the Catholic Church in the Council for Jews and Christians in Belgium. And some of you will also know that from 2013 to 2017, Professor Pollefeyt served as Vice President for Educational Policy here at KU Leuven. So welcome to you all joining the call. Welcome, Didier.
So greetings from KU Leuven. That's the place where we are for the moment. And I'd like first to introduce our city, our university, our faculty, and also our research group. So this activity is organized in the center of the lovely city of Leuven, of which you see here some images. We are the biggest university of Belgium, and we are in the ranking, the world ranking of universities, at the 45th place, following the Times Higher Education ranking. This year we are celebrating the 600th anniversary of our university, which was founded in 1425, and of course had in its history a lot of eminent scholars. I refer here in the 16th century to Erasmus, who started the idea of academic research, also in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. I refer to Vesalius, also in the 16th century, who was the founder of modern human anatomy. We have had, of course, in the 20th century, Georges Lemaire, who was the founder of the Big Bang Theory. And in 1974, we had a Nobel Prize winner, Christian de Duve, for his research on the human cell. Our university is situated in Belgium, the beating heart of Europe. I'd just like to mention that Belgium is the second in Europe and the fifth worldwide in research and development investments, which shows that our main resource is in our country is knowledge, which is also provided, of course, through this session. KU Leuven is a comprehensive university with programs in all fields of study, including English and Dutch programs, especially graduate programs, as you can see. We form a vibrant community with more than 13,000 professors. We have more than 7,000 PhD students within our university. They are coming from a diverse international context with more than 150 countries represented within our university. It is a Catholic university, and some weeks ago we were happy to receive here Pope Francis for the 600th anniversary. You see him here meeting the rector of the university, and he wrote in the book, the big book of the university, the following sentence. Pope Francis, may this ancient and great university always form minds and hearts open to truths, able to read the signs of the times, and dedicated to noble causes of civil life. Remember, Pope Francis says, reality is superior to ideas, the whole is superior to the parts, unity is superior to conflict, time is superior to space. One of the 15 faculties of this university is the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies, with more than 750 students following studies in all fields of theology. We have both civil degrees and canonical degrees, both STB, STL, and STD degrees. We are on the 6th place on the world ranking for theological faculties, and our dean is Benedict Lemmelijn, who is also a member of the Pontifical Biblical Commission. In that Faculty of Theology, we have the ECSI Research Group, looking for enhancing Catholic school identity, and recently we have more than 600,000 people who have participated worldwide, constituting, I think, the biggest data on Catholic school identity in the world. ECSI has done a lot of research in Australia, and you can see here with the red stars all the moments we have been in Australia with you, and all the yellow stars are visits from groups from Australia to Belgium for online intensive courses. So welcome from ECSI, from Faculty of Theology, from KU Leuven, situated in Belgium, the heart of Europe. This is the program we have prepared for you for presenting this new practical theological instrument. First, we will introduce what is a PTI, and then we concentrate on this new one that is launched today. First, presenting the concepts and the models we are using. Secondly, describing the skills and dispositions you need to create a Catholic dialogue school. And then in the third part, reflecting on applications of it in the Australian context. At the end, there will be some feedback by Professor Teresa Brown and a moment for questions from your side. So welcome in this program. I hand over to Michael again.
Thank you very much, Didier. I'll just again welcome everyone who's joined us in the last few minutes, and invite you to keep your microphones on mute. Reminder that this is being recorded, so your camera on indicates your consent to be recorded. And I'll invite you to enter questions or remarks in the chat at any time you'd like during the presentation. We do have some minutes scheduled at the end to answer a few questions that we'll pull out of the chat. With that, I'll introduce my colleague, Jan Bouwens.
So good morning, everybody. It's quite early in the morning here. Good to see you all again. Good afternoon in Australia. ECSI is about assessing and enhancing Catholic school identity. We assess using empirical instruments, quantitative and qualitative. And this morning, this session is about enhancing Catholic identity by means of PTIs, which stands for Practical Theological Instrument. It's in fact an umbrella term to contain any kind of formation instrument, large and small, that is used for personal and professional development of people so they can effectively work on enhancing the identity of their organization. Typically, it are staff and leaders of schools, primary and secondary, also people in Catholic education offices or even higher education institutions like universities can use PTIs to become more aware of what they can do to enhance the identity of their institution. You always start with the complexity of the diversity of the people in our schools. This diversity is here. Those are the people we work with that are given to us to develop. And then we reflect on the relationship between Catholic identity and the diversity of the people for whom we are responsible and for whom we care. We are theologians using sociological methods to gather information about reality, and then we want to enhance that reality. As you know, ECSI has a particular theological, anthropological, and educational vision, a view, a mission that we try to make come true through our endeavors. We focus on a particular topic that is relevant for Catholic identity. Last masterclass, we talked about the philosophical concept, a theological concept of verrijzenis, resurrection. We have a PTI on enhancing a culture of prayer. Today we talk about the important topic of dialogue. We are considering making a PTI on sacred spaces or student retreats or Mary. We think about creating a PTI in Mariology. Every time it focuses on a particular topic that is relevant for Catholic identity and I would like to develop. As you know, ECSI is about 3 shifts. Here are the 3 main typological models: PCB scale, Melbourne scale, Victoria scale, you're all familiar with the 3 golden dots, which is in fact the same dot represented in 3 different ways. And if you zoom out and reconsider this, there are in fact 3 movements, 3 shifts that we like to promote, and always happen at the same time. The hermeneutical shift from catechesis to hermeneutics, the belief and religiosity shift from those who are secularized to Catholic identity, and a recontextualization shift from values education to recontextualization, from monocorrelation to multi-correlation. And also today, this PTI will work on enhancing the 3 shifts at the same time. You can find all these enhancing materials on our website. You go to exi.site/au, and you find there a button, a section, the blue section on enhancing, and you click it. Yesterday we uploaded the whole PTI on the website. You can download all the materials there. The materials are available to you all, but you need to know the access password to download the materials. And that's in fact the same password that you need to do the surveys. So if you have to ask, you will never know. And if you know, you need only ask. Yeah? So you can have access to the materials. You are kindly requested to get in contact with your ECSI diocesan representative before you use these materials. You can access them anyway, but it is nice to keep them in the loop, and they are there to help you, to assist you in these activities. The ECSI Resource Development Project is a collaboration across dioceses and states in Australia. Academic institutions are involved and other companies. We work together with KU Leuven to develop all these materials. You can see them on the screen. They each send out a representative to the PTI working group. All of these people have kindly collaborated to the development of the PTI on dialogue. At some point, we sent the pre-final version to them. There was an extensive feedback round. They gave us lots of tips and information that we have carefully processed to arrive at the final version of the PTI. And we thank all of these contributors for their work. Okay. We can now dive into the material itself, and I give the floor to my colleague Michael to give an introduction to the PTI on dialogue.
Thank you, Jan. So in the next 5 or 6 minutes now, I'll invite us to begin looking at the PTI program. I'll start first with a general introduction to this specific program to give you an idea of what kinds of things are included in these materials, broadly speaking, what kind of content is included, skills and dispositions, and where you can get these materials. And after that, we'll then move to an in-depth look at the 3 parts of this program and the content that's in each session. So we start first with the broad question of why dialogue? Why choose this topic for this PTI? First of all, because it's requested by the National Dialogue School Consortium in Australia for good reason, and parallel to that, because it's a very, very needed topic in schools today. You know as well as we do that as we operate schools in contexts of secularization and increasing pluralization, we have more and more and more of these encounters with diversity and difference. And the question then is how to build a rich culture of dialogue at the Catholic school. That same vision for dialogue in Catholic schools, you may know, has been recently affirmed by the final document of the Synod of Bishops, which hasn't even been translated yet into most languages. But if you've had a chance to look through that document, you'll see that they affirm an important place for Catholic schools in this culture of dialogue. Not only a dialogue between faith and culture in general, but also, and more specific to this PTI, a dialogue that is intercultural, interreligious, interworldview, interconvictional. One that comes from Catholic identity as a starting point, as a perspective on that dialogue and difference, and one that's also therefore appreciated by people of many other religious faiths and traditions. And that same vision for dialogue addresses one of the three core shifts in enhancing Catholic school identity, namely that shift towards a multi-correlational form of dialogue. Multi-correlational meaning where we look for many different kinds of intersections, some of which produce sameness and some of which indicate vast differences. So multi-correlational dialogue. And therefore a dialogue that moves us beyond that monocorrelation of Christian values education. We'll say more about that a little bit later. So this program, this PTI, is organized around that question. How can we being you in the local school, how can we create a rich educational culture of interreligious, interworldview dialogue that is underpinned and informed by the Catholic faith tradition? In this program, then, participants, as a set of global outcomes, participants will it's intended that they will inquire three things. First of all, key theological and practical concepts and models. Secondly, and importantly, the key skills and dispositions, and we'll go in depth in a bit as to what those are. As well as thirdly, looking ahead towards viable directions, towards how that culture of dialogue can be more effectively implemented in the school. This program has been designed around these theological concepts and this theological framework. Just to give you a very general overview here, you see in the red section the theological concepts and models, in the yellow section the skills and dispositions in the program, and then thirdly in the blue section on the right a look at the environment of the Catholic school itself. So this is what we've used theologically to design this program, so that you can trust that there's a lot of deep theological content here, but it's not all about theological content, and I'll say a moment what else is involved in the program. Just know that in a few moments I will go into depth around these theological concepts, okay? So that program is organized into 8 sessions. In the same order as that diagram on the previous screen. First, we look at the concepts and models. So first, the question of power asymmetry and risk in relationships. Then the question of the theological perspective on dialogue. Then thirdly, the question of a model for dialogue, especially in the case of a Catholic school. And then we go to part 2, where we dig in deeper to the skills and dispositions. So a fundamental disposition to dialogue is that of hospitality. Professor Pollefeyt will take us deeper into that in a few moments. We also look at the question of discernment in dialogue, especially discernment that provokes questions in myself as I encounter the other in dialogue. And then the third part of this program, sessions 7 and 8, are opportunities for participants to think very locally and practically about what that culture would look like, what it already does look like, and what it could look like even more richly in their school. Just a few quick points about things that are broadly included in this program. So this is a program that is meant to be facilitated at the local level. Ideally, there is a person in the school or shared maybe between schools that is facilitating this at the local level with the full support of the principal. And that support is not only a kind of, great go do it support, but also a support of I'm present. I'm present, I'm involved. I'm also reflecting on how my own leadership is a model for dialogue in this school. So to that extent, there's in the guidebook, there are several pages of guidance for principals and facilitators in the planning phase as you look towards developing this program in your school. Every one of the 8 sessions includes a series of active engagement strategies that we're probably all familiar with. So from activating our thinking to activating prior knowledge and experience, to listening and reading, to exercising skills and dispositions, and then every session ends with an integration and extension moment. Several of these sessions, 3 of them in fact, include role plays, and this will be a very effective way for participants to engage in practicing the skills, dispositions, and concepts in this program in a way that is less threatening, because I don't have to identify my own position. I'm going to role play somebody's position in this. So just know that that's there, and all of these are included as handouts in the materials. I've already mentioned that every session ends with an opportunity to connect, extend, and challenge your thinking, your prior knowledge, your experience. And every session, every following session begins with a warm-up opportunity in which participants can bring forward insights from their journaling from the previous session. So over the course of 8 sessions, people will have many opportunities to keep their learning bridged as they move forward from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. And then lastly, I'll just mention, because this is also very important, that the guidebook includes a section for principals and facilitators on how to think actively about creating a safe space for dialogue. We know this is not easy for school people, for any people, and so there's thinking here around what intentionally the facilitator can do to emphasize safety as a norm and safety as a strategy for practicing dialogue. So all of that is contained in a guidebook that includes as well the manual, if you will, for each session, and that full guidebook is downloadable from our website. You see that here is just a screen capture of that website showing you that the guidebook, as well as all of the session materials, the slide decks, the handouts, as well as accessibility supports like transcripts, image descriptions, etc., are all available on our website through the download page. And with that, I will bring back Jan Bouwens and Professor Pollefeyt to take us deeper into the content, especially theological content of part 1.
Thank you, Michael. So, as you know, ECSI is aiming for the model of the dialogue school instead of the monologue school of the past, because dialogue is needed to renew and therefore maintain the Catholicity of a school. It's needed to recontextualize the particularity of the Catholic faith tradition in a context of already existing and rapidly increasing diversity among students and staff. We need dialogue to move on with Catholic school identity. The Catholic identity of the future will arise through dialogue, or it won't be at all. Creating such a culture of dialogue in our Catholic schools begins with the education of certain theoretical concepts and models. The theoretical framework, developed in part 1 of the PTI, in sessions 1, 2, and 3, is an inevitable preparation for developing the skills and dispositions required for dialogue in part 2, sessions 4, 5, and 6. So it's very basic. First, we need to learn the models in theory, and then we apply them in real life. Next, in sessions 7 and 8, we use our newly found skills and dispositions to give shape to an educational culture that we call the Catholic Dialogue School. Let's dive in session 1. Engaging in dialogue is engaging in a relationship. The first step in the development of an ECSI theory of dialogue is to analyze the dynamic of relationships from a Catholic Christian point of view, in particular the pedagogical relationships in a school. In session 1, participants will gain an informed understanding of the relational nature of dialogue, with attention to power imbalances and risks. To understand this better, let's begin by reiterating one of the 3 central theoretical models of the ECSI framework, the Victoria scale typology. We expect that this diagram looks very familiar to the participants in this masterclass, but it may need to be repeated and rehearsed with school staff teams. In brief, there are 2 dimensions that constitute a grid with 4 quadrants. Each quadrant, in its purest form, refers to a certain school type. You have the monologue school at the top left, colorless, the colorful, and the dialogue school. The yellow circle, more affectionately called the golden dot, refers to the preferential point on theological and pedagogical grounds. True dialogue schools are not supposed to be colorless or colorful. They're also not supposed to be monological, but they're supposed to be dialogue schools. Maximal Catholic identity in relation to maximal solidarity with otherness. In that situation, and only there, both Catholics and other believers come into their own, while it offers the opportunity to recontextualize the Catholic faith tradition in today's world. And a key condition for this is post-critical belief. Consequently, there are good reasons why we choose to make a PTI on dialogue, and this activity is at the heart of our identities and our relationships, of our learning and our teaching and our faith in the triune God who is manifested in history as love, thus relationship, to whom we are related in celebration and in prayer, in dialogue. The participants are invited to actively listen to a short excerpt of a recorded interview with Professor Emeritus Roger Burggraven. You can see his picture on the screen, who is Professor Pollefeyt's teacher and promoter of its PhD. Burggraven explains how our existence is inherently dialogical. Nonetheless, true dialogue is sometimes demanding, sometimes difficult. Not only because it's often painful to understand and accept the other who is strange to us, but also because there are power imbalances at work, consciously and unconsciously. If you have the opportunity, I personally suggest you watch this interview in its entirety. In our ECSI teachings, we apply the inevitable power asymmetries in pedagogical relationships to the typological diagram of the Victoria scale. Because each of the 4 school models that we talked about proposes a different solution of the power asymmetries and the risks involved, while only one of them is justifiable as a genuine Catholic position, namely the dialogue school. I now invite Professor Pollefeyt to explain this in more detail using the schema you see on the slide.
Thank you, Jan. So in fact, everyone likes dialogue. But in the Catholic Dialogue School project, we have a very specific understanding of dialogue. And I think this scheme helps to make this clear. In a colorless school, dialogue is something like a technical exchange of content between the students and the teacher. But here, persons do not engage themselves in this exchange of information. The interaction is structured around rules, procedures, and measurable outcomes. And there's a big distance between the student and the teacher, which is a functional, instrumental relationship. And that's the way that the colorless school solves the question of power, by creating a strong distinction between work and private. In the colorful school, dialogue is mutual, is two-directional. It starts from a very optimistic idea of the possibility of complete mutuality without normativity, without power, but also without transcendence in this model. Dialogue is trying to find out what we have in common, often driven by the illusion that a power-free world or power-free school is possible. Finally, the problem is that in the colorful school, there is nothing that connects people in dialogue beyond the dialogue itself, because there is no transcendence beyond the group in which one participates. So the only rule is, in fact, that of formal tolerance, and if problems pop up in the colorful school, often solutions are found in the colorless school, looking to rules and procedures. In the colorful school, you also may not be too particular or too Christian, for example. Someone who would be too explicit Christian would be seen as someone who is non-dialogical. So somehow in the colorful school, you have to give up your identity to be truly dialogical. In the monologue school, they are very much aware of the power asymmetry or imbalance in the relationships. So in fact, there is a very strong normativity. The student has to listen, for example, to the teacher. So there is power, there is hierarchy, there is asymmetry, and it's even theologically motivated, meaning that in this model, just like the student has to listen to the teacher, the human being has to listen to God. That's the third model. In fact, in the church, we often see this model of dialogue at work. Dialogue is then seen as an opportunity to announce the Catholic faith. Dialogue becomes an instrument of proclamation and evangelization. We see, however, that this model empirically is strongly resisted by many, especially young people, because it is not seen as through dialogue. In the Catholic dialogue school, we have a much more complex understanding of dialogue. Here we are also aware of the asymmetry and of the power dynamics that are at work in dialogue. So it's not a naive understanding of dialogue. The relationship between the student and the teacher is not an exchange between equals, but is a profoundly asymmetrical relationship. Especially the student is very vulnerable in this situation. As we also say that in the same way, this reflects also how the human being is in an asymmetrical relationship with God or the divine. I'm also only human. I should be humble. I should be modest in my relationship towards the divine. But on the other hand, in the Catholic perspective, God also looks for dialogue with the human being. God needs our answer. In fact, revelation, incarnation is God reaching out to us in a caring and in a loving way. That's specific for the Catholic tradition. Just as the human being is dependent on God, God is dependent also on our answer. And this is also reflected in the pedagogical relationship. The teacher also looks for the dialogue with the student. The student needs to give an answer to the call of the teacher, and the teacher will do this not in an instrumental way, but in a bidirectional, integral way. So just as God made himself vulnerable to the world, we can say that in our Catholic dialogue schools, we make ourselves vulnerable for the vulnerability of the other, who is our students. And in such a dialogue, the power balance is shifting. The Christian faith puts the logic of the world upside down, and the weak other, the vulnerable students, becomes the powerful. The learner becomes our teacher. And it's a kind of ethical power that is at work that asks from me as a teacher, as a principal, to take it up for the other, especially for the suffering of the other, even if this brings me to the sacrifice of the cross. And it's this specific understanding of dialogue that qualifies a Catholic dialogue project that is based on Christ. And that's, in fact, one of the theoretical frameworks of this PTI.
Thank you, Didier. We move on to session 2 of 8 of the PTI on dialogue. We distinguish, in fact, different kinds of dialogue. There is ecumenical dialogue, a conversation between different Christian denominations and groups. Interreligious dialogue is broader, the conversation between different religions. We have interconvictional or interworldview dialogue, which is even more encompassing. It refers to the conversations and exchanges between peoples or groups who hold different fundamental beliefs, worldviews, or convictions, not just religious ones. This type of dialogue is broader than interfaith or intra-faith dialogue. Now, in this second session, we will learn that there are different ways to approach these dialogues, each with certain qualities and shortcomings. One approach will stand out as the one that fits the model of the Catholic Dialogue School, namely the approach of dialogue as hermeneutical translation. In session 2, participants will become familiar with 4 existing paradigms on dialogue, along with their associated educational strategies: exclusivism, inclusivism, pluralism, and particularism. When one enters a dialogical encounter with strange others, there are always pre-existing theological assumptions about how the identity, worldview, and ideology of the other person relate to one's own. In each instance, dialogue takes on a different function and meaning. For this PTI, we have recorded knowledge clips where Didier explains each model. Briefly put, exclusivism holds essentially that only I have the one real truth, and dialogue is for the purpose of projecting my real truth into a world where all other truths are false. With inclusivism, I see my truth everywhere, even in the other who just doesn't know it yet. Dialogue serves the purpose of leading others to see my truth in themselves. In pluralism, one maintains that there are many truths, with many core similarities among them, since all truths point at the same end. And dialogue is an effort towards discovering those similarities and glossing over the differences. By contrast with particularism, there are many truths, each pointing to its own unique end. Thus, one is incomprehensible to the other. And that means that dialogue is impossible at the level of what is true or not. Ultimately unsatisfied with each of these approaches, Professor Pollefeyt designed a 5th model, namely dialogue as hermeneutical translation. But before we get into that, the PTI participants will practice the 4 existing paradigms. We invite them to experience the 4 ways of dialogue firsthand by means of an entertaining role-play exercise about the following tantalizing question: cake, cookies, pie, what's the right choice for weddings? Even though they have the same ingredients, as we all know, people passionately hold different ideological viewpoints on this subject. Participants will be organized in groups of 4 to 6 persons. Each participant is assigned a certain perspective that he or she must represent, following the instructions on a handout. So there are multiple materials and handouts available. I have here some examples with me. Then they get the discussion going by first conveying the core of their own perspective, then posing questions to others in a certain way, interject additional elements while staying in character the whole time. The exercise is concluded with a group reflection on what contribution or lack thereof each of the 4 paradigms makes to the dialogue. What is more, in fact, this exercise will enable the participants to better understand the specificity of the 5th model, the preferred attitude for the Catholic Dialogue School, that of hermeneutical translation. It enables meaningful encounters and dialogue between strange others, in which I come away from the dialogue with a transformed sense of my identity and self-understanding, and the other can do so as well. All of this results in a 5-fold typology that is quite illuminating about what happens when people with different convictions come in contact with each other. Being aware of what their different options are can be really helpful in navigating the currents of the dialogues that take place at a school. To understand better the approach of dialogue as hermeneutical translation, we would like to stream the 5th knowledge clip as part of this masterclass. So I'm about to play the clip from inside the PowerPoint. A note of caution, the sound should come through fine. The video may appear a little choppy at your end, not entirely fluent. But nobody panic, you can still read the text on the screen. If the sound is too soft or too loud, you may want to adjust your volume a little. If there's no sound at all, let us know in the chat. This is kind of tricky, but we're going to try. Let's now listen to Professor Pollefeyt. Okay. A second.
The 5th model is the hermeneutical model of dialogue. It refers to hermeneutics, or interpretation of reality, and in fact, such a position accepts and will work with different interpretations that can be exchanged among the members in a dialogue. A hermeneutical position, first of all, recognizes that there is diversity. That's what they learn from pluralism. There are different positions possible and legitimate also. Secondly, it also accepts from particularism that I recognize that this diversity is something challenging, that this is not easy, that you cannot simply harmonize different positions, that there is a real difference among different positions possible in the dialogue. That's what we learn from particularism, and that I should respect also the perspective, the radical different perspective of the other. Thirdly, I also recognize in a hermeneutical position that I cannot look to reality but from my own perspective, with my own glasses, and that's what I learned from inclusivism. And finally, in a hermeneutical position, I learned from exclusivism that we should not accept every position, that sometimes some people in the dialogue exclude themselves, and we should protect always the hermeneutical space, the space of dialogue, as something vulnerable but something valuable for the dialogue. What is now typical for the hermeneutical position in dialogue? Well, the idea is here that even if I'm aware that my own perspective is different, is particular within that plurality, that I am not enclosed, not imprisoned in my own perspective, like particularism is saying. That it's possible that I can communicate my position in the language of the position of the other. I can communicate myself, I can open up myself towards the other. Of course, not completely, not in all transparency, but to a certain level, I am able to explain myself to the other, and at the same time, the other is also able to explain, to express, to communicate himself or herself towards me. And the key idea in a hermeneutical understanding of dialogue is translation. I can translate my language into the language of the other, and I also can learn the language of the other. So there is a dynamic of translation from both sides. It's like learning languages, learning my own language, learning the other to understand my own language, also learning the language of the other, even if I will never be able to speak in such a way that I would sound like a native if I learn the language of another. So translation is possible, and translation has both risks and possibilities, new possibilities. Yeah? So I can, of course, make bad translations, but in the translation I can also discover new layers of meaning in myself and in the text that I am translating. And I can also learn in the language of the other, seeing and reading new perspectives. So in the dialogue, I will invite the other to understand my own perspective, and I will also try to understand the perspective of the other. And it's in this dynamic of crossing over and coming back that I can enrich eventually myself. So it refers to hermeneutics, meaning to the art of interpretation. I can interpret my own tradition in such a way that it becomes accessible in the context of the other. So I can explain myself into the dialogue to show the plausibility, the logic of my own position, and I can also learn to see the possibilities, the logics, the interpretations at work in the position of the other. So, in fact, it's making of the dialogue a kind of adventure, looking for a common truth that is beyond, if you want, our own specific traditions, philosophies, and religions. It's making of truth something as a horizon to which I'm walking. At the moment I walk to the horizon, I have a perspective, but it's a perspective that I can never catch. It is always removing itself from me. And in fact, if you walk together, the truth is the landscapes I discover in moving towards the horizon. I can also explain it with the story of the disciples walking to Emmaus after the death of Jesus. They walk together, they encounter Christ, they do not recognize him, but it's in the walking and in the dialogue that at some point the other can reveal himself, not only through words, but through symbols, can reveal himself and the identity of the other. That can become transformative in the dialogue for my own life. And that's what a hermeneutical understanding of dialogue wants to do.
Session 3 of part 1 concerns the last important piece of theoretical formation that builds on previous learnings. How do we analyze the structure of a true dialogical encounter? Many people like dialogue, but few are actually capable of it. Hence the following metaphor. Dialogue, really dialoguing, is with a stranger, someone who is different from me. A person who holds a different position is like starting home, crossing over into strange lands, and then coming back home. In this session, participants will envision the three-step movement for genuine interreligious and interworldview dialogue in an educational setting. Each of the three steps matter. In the course of the PTI, participants will learn and practice each of the three steps. Out of respect for the other, one needs to engage in the dialogue well prepared, just like you have to prepare well when you go on a trip. Crossing over into strange lands is always an adventure that requires an attitude of openness and receptivity and the willingness to listen and be touched by the other, allowing the encounter to interrupt my own perspective. But then I need to return to my home and process the lessons learned and integrate them into my own identity that may shift as a consequence. Again, we're going to listen to Didier Pollefeyt, who teaches about the three movements in another knowledge clip. For your information, in total, the PTI contains 15 video clips, including 9 self-produced knowledge clips like this one. So are you ready? Here we go.
In interreligious or interconvictional learning, we distinguish didactically 3 steps or 3 movements that can be made as a kind of learning circle. The idea is in the first step to start from home, meaning that when you will enter into a interconvictional dialogue, in the first place you have to do your homework. You have to prepare yourself for the encounter with the other. Like you prepare for a trip to a city or to a country, you inform yourself about the weather, the climate, the geography, the monetary system, the political system, the nice places to see, the language of the people, the cultures, the habits, the foods, the clothing. In the same way, if you enter into an interconvictional encounter, you in the first place do your homework, trying to understand the other. In the same way, you prepare yourself for the encounter with the other by learning about his or her language, habits, stories, and rituals. It's important this is not only a cognitive exercise, it's also an effective one. In the sense of how do I feel about the other? What are my presuppositions about the other? What are the things that I do not understand in the story or the other, or that creates resistance or makes me angry? So it's also on that level that you prepare at home before you are crossing over. That's the second movement, a well-prepared movement, crossing over, meaning you accept the hospitality of the other. You are aware that you enter into the space of someone else who is different from you, but at the same time wants to welcome you. And in this space of encounter, it is allowed to ask also critical questions. Of course, hospitality implies that you respect the room of the other, the space of the other, the language of the other, the customs of the other. But within that encounter, you are allowed to ask questions, even critical questions, to come to better understand the other and to see if your presuppositions are correct or can be nuanced. It is not the goal of this second movement to come to a kind of quick and easy harmonization in the sense of we all believe finally in the same thing, but that you're really interested in what makes the other particular, what makes the other different. And of course also what do we have in common, but both continuity and discontinuity. And sometimes it will be a very nice, welcoming experience. At some points you can also experience resentment, resistance, anxiety, or even angriness in that encounter. And there's also space to agree, finally, to disagree on some points. So you learn, in fact, to express also your own identity in the presence of the identity of the other in such a way that you try to understand each other as far as that is possible. Hospitality does not mean that you become a member of the community of the other, that you start participating in the rituals of the other. You always will be a guest, following the rules that every guest respects, also if you travel in a more secular way to another city or to another country. That's the second movement. The third movement then is finally again coming home back. That's the third step. Like you come back from a city trip or from a tour, a world tour, for example, you come back also home in an interconvictional learning process. And of course you have to process a lot. What have I learned from the other? How have I experienced the hospitality of the other? Where were my presuppositions confirmed? Where have I to review my position towards the other? Do I look in another way to the other? Can I also look somehow with the glasses of the other to the world? And finally, you have to ask the question also, how does this now change, transform, enrich my own identity? And if I look towards my own space, could also that space become a space of hospitality where the other can be invited in the next movement, starting up the circle of starting home, crossing over, coming back once more.
Starting home, crossing over, and coming back home. A changed person. The active listening activity is followed by exercises that help assimilate the information. One of them provides a vision on the restructuring of existing information in our consciousness in response to disturbing elements from the outside. In order to be able to give the new information a proper place, the structure of existing information sometimes has to be rearranged. Another exercise is a perspective play. Participants will practice the 3 movements by mimicking a debate on the topic of creation care, introduced by a YouTube clip titled "Why Should Christians Care for Creation?" There are handouts that prescribe 4 positions that people have to role play in a debate. Again, I have the handouts here. According to the typology of the post-critical belief scale, so there is a literal believer who proofreads the Bible and finds divine commandments to rule over the earth and care for it responsibly. End of story. There's an external critic who uses science to disprove the Christian creation myth, blaming it for the damage done to nature by Christian civilizations for centuries. And he is motivated simply by witnessing the destruction all around us. There is a relativist who browses a wide range of religions and worldviews and finds good reasons here and there to take care of nature, animals, and the environment. And finally, there is a post-critical believer who rejects any attitude of mastery over creation, but finds strong motivation in her faith to engage in concrete acts of nature care. As always, the session will end with an integration and extension activity, a journaling instruction, and a closing prayer. So far, I've given you a brief overview of the part 1 of the PTI on dialogue. And I'll hand over to Michael again, who will continue introducing part 2, that will develop the skills and dispositions needed for dialogue.
Yes, thank you, Jan. So in part 2 of the program, there are 3 sessions that all focus on the question of hospitality in different ways. The first of those 3, the session 4, looks at the foundation of hospitality and looks specifically at how that hospitality occurs in relation to those who are of other religions, faith, traditions, etc. Session 5 further extends that disposition of hospitality to the specific question of young learners. So from an adult learner, a teacher, to a young learner, a student, and vice versa. Session 6, the 3rd session in this part, then also looks at the question of hospitality, but hospitality in a sense to myself. In that session, we go deeper into the question of spiritual discernment in the context of dialogue. So going back to session 4, the first of those 3 sessions, we begin this part 2 with a deeper look into hospitality as a theological disposition for dialogue from a Christian perspective. And for that, I invite Didier.
Okay, so hospitality is, for creating Catholic dialogue school, in our view, really a predisposition. I would call it a kind of theological virtue, That is the precondition to come to an authentic dialogue. In fact, hospitality is a sacred duty in many worldviews and religions. I refer to the First Testament, where it is said to the Jewish people, you yourself has been a stranger in Egypt, and God took care of you as a Jewish people. So you have today also to take care of the stranger. In fact, we are all strangers, and each time I come to Australia, you also become aware that also Australians are guests in their own country. And I'm always impressed when Australians are paying respect to the traditional custodians of the land, because such acknowledgements, in fact, shows respect and recognition for the original culture, heritage, and history of the Aboriginal people. It's being aware that you're guest in your own country, like we, in fact, are all guests in the home we live in. The Bible is full of narratives of hospitality, and of course the most famous one, and you see the picture we have chosen for this PTI, is Abraham receiving 3 strangers in the desert, and by receiving them as guests, in fact, he, without knowing, is welcoming God. And in the Christian tradition, we even say that this is an anticipation of the triune God that is invited, that received the hospitality of Abraham. At the same time, these guests have also something to offer, which is very important to see. And as you know, during this meeting, Abraham and Sarah are promised a son. So the stranger is also a gift to us. We see that also Jesus is in many places a guest. Zacchaeus is inviting him, Martha and Mary are inviting him, and I already referred to the Emmaus story, where at the end the 2 disciples of Jesus invite him to stay with them. And there we learn, in fact, that in the encounter with the strange, the other, in fact, Christians meet Christ himself. So you could say that the stranger is God incognito. God shows and hides God's self in the stranger. And sometimes hospitality is planned in advance, but sometimes it is also unforeseen, unplanned, not romantic, but often very difficult. We explain how hospitality is sometimes also risky. You have the risk of paternalism in hospitality, with an unilateral emphasis on the care that the guest receives in order to gather as a host praise for your acts of charity. That's why, in our view, hospitality should always be a mutual welcoming of each other. It's also important for Christians, for Catholic schools, that they are willing to be the guest in the space of the other. And that's why we speak about crossing over and coming back, that we are also open to receive from the other. We also say that hospitality does not mean that I have to diminish my own identity. A guest, if he is received in my house, in my school, is also expected to be respectful, to be curious, to be open, to be grateful. That's also the reason why sometimes the Bible is cautious about hospitality. In Jesus Sirach, we read, do not bring everyone in your house. So it means that there is also a command for those who come into my tradition and who has to respect my tradition also. Now, why is hospitality important for dialogue? Because, in fact, in hospitality, I accept, I love the other. It helps me integrating identity and otherness in my being. I commit myself in hospitality to respect the dignity of the other. So he or she can present himself or herself in their own terms. I avoid to reduce immediately the other, like in inclusivism, to my own familiar categories. I recognize the difference, the particularity of the other. And moreover, in the hospitality, I learn about myself through the encounter with the other. It's a reciprocal process of mutual recognition, and it implies even the risk, the good risk of transformation of my own identity through the dialogue. In fact, that is what recontextualization means. So hospitality is an ethical framework, it's a theological virtue, and it's also a practical method for Catholic dialogue schools. Through dialogue emerges when a school also becomes a space of hospitality, of radical openness for every student. Catholic education is for all, and not only for Catholics. So a Catholic dialogue school will create a safe space, physical, but also a psychological space for genuine encounter, where I suspend towards my children and my defensive postures, where I'll come to kind of deep listening, and I practice a kind of radical acceptance of the other. Of course, in this dialogue, in our school, we have also to offer something as hosts. And that's what I call with recur linguistic hospitality, linguistic hospitality. It means that I will learn my guests the Catholic or the Christian language, which is often for many of our students no longer their first language. It's a new language that will open for them, at least as an invitation, new worlds. And I would welcome all my students to learn the basics of the Catholic faith, which is often a new language. And sometimes I will need the act of translation, which is in another session, to do that. And I have also to accept that even within the Christian language, there are many dialects that we can hear, different sounds within the Christian language. We will also learn the languages of the others. And to use Pope Francis, we will also listen to the voices of those who have no language anymore, those at the margins of our society, at the margins of our world. And finally, I would like to use the image of Pentecost as, in fact, a kind of divine hospitality. What specific is to the Pentecost story is that we speak different languages, but that we still can understand each other. And in fact, you could say that the linguistic hospitality of a Catholic dialogue school is in fact mirroring God's welcoming nature, God's inclusive character itself. And for me, a Catholic dialogue school, from that perspective, is a place where we break down language barriers as a part of our mission of work as Catholic institutions. So that's why hospitality is so central as a predisposition in this PTI.
Thank you very much, Didier. That sense of radical hospitality as a disposition, also as a skill, and that sense of translation between others as a disposition, also as a skill, is not only a question for one to the religious other, also a question between adults and students, and between adult learners and young learners. So in session 5, then we extend that same sense of hospitality towards young learners and ask the question about what it would take. We ask the question as a school community, what would it take to enable young learners in our school environment to participate also as those who theologize? So that question is raised in session 5, and participants have an extended time to engage in dialogue with each other about that practical question in the school. Also in session 5, they used the model of Professor Annemie Dillon here from KU Leuven to ask about how we approach young learners in this question of theologizing. Is it we who theologize, we adults who theologize about them? Secondly, could it be that we say that the theologizing is done by them, but we're the ones who design it? Or third, and most importantly, can we shift to an environment where we adult learners theologize with young learners. So that's the framework used in session 5. Session 6 asks the question then with participants about spiritual discernment and how I reflect on my own encounter with the transcendent, with my God, with myself in this dialogue. And to provoke the reflections in session 6 here, we have a variety of resources that the local facilitator can choose from, depending on prior knowledge and experience. And that's all listed in the guidebook along with those options. So some of those resources come from the Synod on synodality, specifically the question of discernment and what that looks like in the synod, in synodality. And another set of resources comes from Professor Jos Mons here at KU Leuven, who not only studies synodality and post-critical belief, but also looks deeply in the question of how the Spirit moves, in my own discernment. So there's a variety of resources in session 6 that the facilitator can choose from depending on local prior knowledge and experience at the local level. We move now to the last part of the program, which includes 2 sessions. And I'll invite my colleague Jan to introduce that.
After having assimilated the theoretical underpinnings and appropriated the practical skills and dispositions of the science and art of dialogue, it's time to put it all together. A Catholic school that is geared towards the future creates a culture of hospitality, a culture of dialogue. It's an educational context that facilitates the encounter between diverse people with various religious and worldviews, among whom are Catholic believers. And through those encounters, the Catholics rediscover what it means to be Christian, and particularly Catholic, in our context of the 21st century. And the same is true for those who hold different beliefs and convictions. And that's why precisely the Catholic Dialogue School deserves recognition for promoting the best possible personal development of all its members. So when Catholic schools engage in dialogue with diversity, it hits two birds with one stone, so to speak. But when a school continues negating diversity by correlating it with so-called gospel values, it hits none. So we have arrived at part 3 of the PTI, context and application. Sessions 7 and 8 apply our newly acquired dialogical capacities to the creation of a dialogical Catholic school context. Through several exercises and a self-assessment, in session 7, participants evaluate a real-world application of key concepts, skills, and dispositions through the lens of the Catholic Dialogue School. First, we revisit the Victoria Scale typology, full circle, because the participants are now ready to gain a deeper understanding of the 4 school types and the decisive differences between them. Based on the guiding questions provided by the PTI facilitator, people are invited to practice individually and in pairs using their journals while they integrate additional textual and video input. Especially, they can now better understand the specificity of the dialogue school model, which is the recommended position indicated by the golden dot. The theory is translated into practice by means of a third perspective play exercise, an imaginary class visit to a sacred space or place of worship. Yeah? So imagine a group of students from your school and they want to visit a Catholic church with their teacher. But another group suggests we go to a mosque or a synagogue or a temple or an indigenous sacred site. And yet others decline and suggest we go to a museum instead, or to another more educational place than a church. And the question is, how should the school respond to these suggestions and why exactly? And the participants receive handouts to put themselves in the role of a teacher, to debate this matter with other teachers during a staff meeting, and then to defend their decision to the parents. In the following exercise, people read an excerpt from the identity statement of Catholic Education Flanders on their definition of the Catholic Dialogue School. It articulates their vision of this school model within the unique conditions of the Flemish history, culture, and society. The participants' task is to observe the characteristics of the Flemish version and to wonder which of those characteristics resonate with them as they think of their own local context in Australia, and which characteristics might challenge them, perhaps. Finally, the participants carry out an assessment of the state of affairs of the dialogue school model in their own school. By means of a special handout with 4 text input fields, they reflect on their own school community, on its current strengths and future opportunities towards the model of the Catholic Dialogue School. And they need to write down their own ideas and the ideas of others. And the purpose of the exercise is to engage in critical thinking about the characteristics applied in their own context. How can we evolve closer to this ideal? What could be my own role in this, given my personal characteristics and talents? That will be the end of the penultimate session 7. One concluding session to go. And to explain this, I return the floor again to Michael. Yeah?
Yes. Thank you, Jan. So in the final session, you can imagine that participants will have had a lot of reflections, insights, discussions over the previous 7 sessions. They will have written a lot in their journal, reflected a lot on their learnings, observed a lot in their life, in their school. So session 8 is a really important moment of integration and extension. And for that purpose, I'll just underscore the importance of having the journal exercises all throughout the previous 7 sessions. Also keeping in mind that schools probably have not scheduled these one day after the other, right? So it's been a whole program over months, probably. So the importance of the journal coming together at this 8th session to integrate, challenge, and extend. Session 8 begins with a reflective video from the Dicastery for Integral Human Development on this question of encounter amidst diversity and difference in our world today. And then the bulk of session 8 happens partly individually, individual reflections on integration, a review of their learning, their insights from the previous 7 sessions, looking back towards those journal entries along with these guides here that review for them the main content of those sessions. And then the other part of session 8 is a discussion with their colleagues about that integration and extension. What have I learned? What shifts are taking place for me? What do I do differently now in my practice? How do I think differently about this? What do we need to do differently as a school to continue moving this shift forward towards this richer environment of interreligious, interworldview dialogue from the Catholic tradition? At the end of session 8, there's a really important moment for the local facilitator and the principal to say here on this blank slide, which is just a placeholder for you locally, what are our next steps so that this program of 8 sessions is not a one and done professional development that goes back on the shelf, but how now will we move forward as a school community to extend this? What future learning do we need? What practical steps will be ahead of us? And that brings us to the end of our 8 sessions in this program. I'll just invite you again to enter any questions or remarks that you have in the chat. We'll see if we have a moment to come back to that. Before we do that, so I'm going to invite Dr. Teresa Brown, forward for some of her own remarks about this program and its opportunities for implementation. If you don't know Teresa, she's senior lecturer in the Faculty of Theology and Philosophy at the Australia Catholic University. At Australian Catholic University. Her doctoral research considered the implications and applications of Leuven theology of interruption and the ways in which this theological approach might help us to think about the relationship between Trinitarian faith and Christian life today. Having previously worked in Australian Catholic secondary schools as a teacher and leader of RE and professional learning, she now works with Catholic education partners around Australia and with us here at KU Leuven to support schools in the articulation, enhancement, and practice of Catholic identity. It is in this capacity that Teresa chairs the PTI Working Group, which is a subsidiary of the Australian Catholic Dialogue School Consortium, who is working in dialogue with the PTI team here at KU Leuven to support, review, develop, and ultimately disseminate this PTI resources. So with that, Teresa, I'll invite you to camera on, mic on. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael, and hello, everybody. And thank you also to Didier and Jan and Michael for your invitation, your very kind invitation to have me speak during this masterclass. Over the course of a few months this year, the members of the PTI Working Group, the wonderful people in the extended list of names at the beginning of this session, and I worked through and reviewed the materials that had already been so carefully and thoughtfully developed by the KU Leuven team, Michael, Amy Castile, and Jan and Didier, of course. And the team have now incorporated all of our feedback, and here we have the final product. It's really a collaborative project. It's a project that should be an immense source of pride for the PTI team in Leuven and for the Australian Catholic Dialogue School Consortium, and of course for the Catholic education officers who are involved. As I see it, the best features of the PTI to my mind are the fact that the materials are really theologically and contextually rich and deep. They're accessible. The participants will be able to find a space for themselves in the process. There are no expectations of theological knowledge or ECSI knowledge going into it, though of course these will be an advantage. The language is accessible and it's contextualised. The program invites and models active and dialogical learning. It's reflective of our Australian context. No additional materials are needed. There's a comprehensive guidebook, slides, handouts, everything's provided. And it's simply a matter of just picking up and running with it and engaging the support of the Catholic Identity and Mission representative in your Catholic Education Office. It engages best practice in adult learning, deep thinking, authentic real-world applications, reflection and integration built in, and the invitation to continue the learning and reflection between sessions. And most importantly, the design supports a reflexive engagement with the materials and the process. It supports the disposition of self-reflection, which leads to new ways of being and acting in the world. And the knowledge and skills and dispositions that are developed through the process have then have the potential to actively affect a dialogical shift in the participants. As we reviewed the materials, the PTI Working Group had some really wonderfully rich conversations around the theme of dialogue, and the process of reviewing and engaging with the materials was formational for us. If you could go to the next slide for me, please. Thank you. So I'd like to share two examples of this. The first is something that Rena Madden shared during one of our meetings. We were talking about the difference between conversation and dialogue. When is dialogue not dialogue? And what's the content of dialogue? And Rena shared, dialogue has to ask the heart questions. And that notion of encounter then is that idea that you're bringing difference close. So if there is nothing different being encountered, then dialogue can't happen because there is no transformation possible. Dialogue doesn't have to be an argument, but it does need to touch the heart. This implies the very subject matter of dialogue. This implies that the very subject matter of dialogue is important. We won't have dialogue about the weather, but we could have dialogue about climate change. Dialogue engages existential questions, she said. And the second thing I wanted to share is something that David Walker shared with us during one of our meetings. I'll give you some context first, and this is taken directly from our feedback document, which we sent to the PTI team in Leuven. In one of the sessions, the question in the Activating Our Thinking session reads, for Christians among us, share an experience of dialogue in which you are able to know and love Jesus better or to share the richness of Jesus' love. We fed back to the PTI team that we think that this provides Christians who are in faith an opportunity to witness to their own faith perspective and share the ways that their faith enables them to make sense of the world around them, to name and notice experiences of encounter. In addition, it provides an invitation to participants who are other than Christian to consider how faith can be interpreted and mediated, and to enter into dialogue about what they say and notice, what they see and notice about their colleague when they speak of such experiences. It also provides an opportunity for a person other than Christian to think about or share how they might name, notice, and express experiences of encounter differently and from their own perspectives. We welcomed this question and saw it as a necessary part of the dialogue that might occur as participants neared the end of the series. In our discussion around this question, David shared the following story. He said, "I was in a school on Monday doing a Catholic identity review, talking to the foundation teacher. And she was recounting a story from prayer that morning where one little girl had shared how sometimes she just likes to get into bed with mum if there's a storm outside or if she's feeling a bit afraid or something. And one of the other little boys in the class, and this is in prayer, said, 'Oh, that's those moments when God rocks us in his arms.' Now, clearly, David said, there is something fantastic going on for that little boy, but the boy's insight also impacted on the whole class and the teacher, and the teacher was still sitting with that story a day or two later. This reminds us of the power of personal story and the profound opportunities presented for all of us when we engage students, young and old, in dialogue around faith. Indeed, when we theologise with children, to use Annemie Dillon's term. It led us as a working group to a discussion about the need also to provide examples of and discuss the impact of non-dialogue, non-engagement, and the hidden curriculum that's often present in schools. For example, the hidden message that's sent by a leader who is answering emails on their phone during a prayer experience led by students, which I've been privy to and I've seen. So during and after our review of the materials, a couple of members of the group then took the opportunity to engage the materials with groups of staff. And I've asked Gina Bernasconi from Ballarat Catholic Education to share some of her experiences there. Over to you for a moment, Gina.
Thanks, Teresa. And just really briefly, the PTI just works, and it's joyful to work with. So two settings for me. The first was with our Catholic education team from Ballarat, about 50 people, and we ran session 1 and unearthed in the feedback, so it's not my opinion you're getting, it's what participants told us, were some wonderful insights and some very challenging questions that I can't imagine would have emerged in any other forum. And the great thing about the PTI is that we get to pick these up as we move on through the sessions spaced across the year. That's the hope. The other is that with the help of the ed consultants from the office, I approached the principals in the diocese, and they operate out of particular geographical zones. And the Southern Zone principals as a whole group across all of next year have committed to doing all the sessions with me. So I'll train them so that they will then lead the PTI in their schools. And I met with them a couple of weeks ago, and it's just fabulous to feel the energy in these principals and their willingness to step into that space, because they realise that it will enable them to deepen their own dialogue and engagement with the tradition, but also to lead with confidence in this space. There's a safety net that the PTI provides, and it will help with the growing independence of the schools who need to take ownership and a stronger leadership in Catholic identity. So that's been my experience, and I'm just so grateful for it. And I think the finished product is gorgeous. So thanks to everybody who was involved.
Thank you, Gina. And just to my final slide, please, Michael. Thank you. So getting started, we're here to help. Dig out your school's ECSI report and look at the staff profile. What are the shifts that are needed? Look over the PTI materials, which now are available for you in the ECSI website. Chat with your school leadership team. Find time in your school calendar and make it a priority. We recommend at least 4 sessions per year for a total of 8 sessions so that there's a continuity there. The closer those sessions are together, the better. Contact, of course, your Catholic identity representative in your diocesan Catholic office, and they'll be an immense support for you. And Robin Horner and I have also designed a unit at master's level specifically for helping you develop an understanding of the PTIs by doing them and implementing them. We're in the process of confirming that at the moment. Hopefully we'll be able to confirm that offering very soon. It will involve a 2-day intensive, perhaps on Zoom, to learn about and work through the PTI, building your confidence and capacity to facilitate it, and then implementing it in your school across a year, and then writing up the report on what you did and the impact that it had on your staff. So, as I said, we're hoping to confirm that offering soon. We've designed the unit and we're waiting for approvals. But in the meantime, if you are interested and would like to know more about that, feel free to email me, and you'll see my email there on the screen. Thank you, Michael, and Didier and Jan, back to you.
Thanks very much, Teresa. Thank you, Gina, also. And thanks to Didier and Jan for presentations today. Just a few final remarks from me. If you do have any questions or would like any further discussion about this, you're welcome to write to us as well by email. You can also enter any remarks in the chat as you're leaving today. You're welcome to do that. Regarding the next masterclass, we don't yet have a date for that, but you can follow the ECSI Catholic Dialogue School newsletter for announcements about future masterclasses, future PTIs, future resources. By benefit of your registration today in this masterclass, you will all be newly or continue to be inscribed in the Catholic Dialogue School newsletter, so you'll receive the next upcoming issue. Following this class, you'll also receive the link to this video, as well as the link to the page where you can download all of the resources. In that same email, you'll also receive a short invitation for any feedback, which also includes suggestions for future masterclass topics. In that same email, you'll also have the opportunity to upload a certificate if you need one for your professional development portfolio. So again, thank you all very much for participating in today's class. Thank you to our presenters, and we wish you the warmest of greetings here from Leuven as we celebrate our 600th anniversary. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.